Hey guys, I'm Brent.
I'm Lila, and you can find us on the web at www.braintrustlive.com.
Yes, that's it.
We've decided to open this podcast with a little bit of good news because it feels like all there ever is anymore is bad news. And I had an epiphany this week, and I wanted to share it with everyone. It's not strictly politically related, but it is international relations related in the broadest possible sense. So I thought it was important. I just wanted everyone to know that we are living through the golden age of ice dancing. There is not a better time to be alive if you're a fan of ice dancing. This is it. If people want to try to come at you and tell you that Torval and Dean is some sort of great experiment in ice dancing, I raise them Papadakis and Cicerone. And I also tell them that there are like probably 10 other ice dance teams that surpass the quality of any ice dance team from like the last like 50 years of history.
Sure.
At me if you want, but you're
wrong.
Torval
and Dean had like one good routine, right? To Ravel, to the
they had one good routine. Yeah. And that was like what made history for them. And great. Sure. I mean, is it great? Sure, it's great. But they are nothing compared to the like top 12 ice dancing teams that we currently have right now competing. And that's not strictly 2020 news because these ice dance teams started to emerge in like 2015, 2017. And if you're going to try to tell me that the great American v Canadian competition of like the early aughts through 2015 is in any way a comparison to this, I'm here to tell you that's bullshit and you should retire yourself as an ice dance commentator. But we have like what I would contend is at least a dozen great ice dance teams right now. And all of them are the best that we've had in history. So
I agree. And I am a person who like did not used to love watching ice dancing.
Well, I'm also here to tell you that we're living in the dark ages of pair skating. So sorry about that.
Oh my God. That never said anything more true. Certainly American pair skating. I mean, but
any pair skate, it doesn't matter what country you're looking at. The best pairs team in the world are complete bullshit compared to what is the glory of modern ice dancing. If you're wondering what pairs should be, and you're thinking because they don't have the tricks that pairs have, that ice dancing is somehow inferior, you're just a wrong person who doesn't understand.
Also, if you're watching pairs skating to see jumps, you're not seeing that.
Well, exactly.
They're not being executed there right now.
That's the tricks that you are watching pairs to see are not available currently, and the footwork that you were watching pairs to see is available in spades in ice dance. And the thing that ice dance offers in terms of entertainment quality is what you are thinking pairs offers you, but you're wrong. It's ice dance that offers you that.
Yeah.
So
there you go. PSA.
I just thought you wanted some good news. There's some good news. Some other good news is that it seems like this whole nonsense about not having the Electoral College having voted and having this whole thing out of our hair, it could be over soon because the Electoral College is voting today, the day you're probably listening to this. It's tomorrow for us recording this, but hopefully, and I do say this with the most minimal amount of enthusiasm, hopefully we will have an official President-elect Biden at the beginning of this week, and we can stop talking about whether we have that or not.
Right. The people at Parler are never going to stop talking about that, though.
I want to have a brief discussion about how Parler is literally the French word for to speak, and it has become like an alt-right crazy person Twitter. And the fact that the people that brought us freedom fries are talking on a platform that is named after a French word is, I think, so typical and epic, but also so ridiculous.
So good. Yeah. But they're like literally, and they were doing this on their second Million MAGA March, which, had hundreds of people at it, which they were having this weekend. But like the MAGA people are ready to overthrow the GOP, which is a delight.
I know. They are so mad at the GOP. They're mad enough that their mouthpieces, like the most bombastic, modern day Ann Coulters of the world, are basically on Parler just like shit talking the GOP. They're ready to burn it to the ground. They also seem ready to start another civil war. They keep asking the South to rise again. I would also ask that people who are not actually American not call for civil wars in America, because what's his face, who really got in hot water.
Oh yeah,
Parler, Milo, what's his face, that alt-right personality. Isn't he also gay? He's like a nightmare person. Yeah. But he was calling for the South to rise, and he's British. You don't get to call for the South to rise as a Brit. If you are Australian or British or any other type of, person who is not American, like, feel free to have an opinion about Donald Trump and the Republican Party. I couldn't care less.
Yeah.
But you certainly shouldn't.
Certainly tear it down if you want.
If you want to.
Like, tear down the party. not America.
But America is not really your purview to tear down. And also, we seem capable of doing that ourselves. So it seems like that's not a necessary
agreed.
thing for you to be involved in. But yeah, Parler was all the talk on Twitter, which is the real Parler, this week, because of how angry everyone was at the Republican Party. And then every quote that they got out of their second Million MAGA march, which mostly seemed like a Klans meeting where they went and like ripped BLM signs out of churches' yards and stuff, was also, they were shouting like destroy the GOP at what is a Republican march.
Yeah.
So that's pretty glorious, but also confusing. I hope that all of them devote all of their energy to asking Georgia residents to vote for Donald Trump for Senate so that they really show everyone how mad they are. And in the same vein, manage to thwart the electoral prospects of the two criminals that they have running for Senate down there. So,
it'd be great.
And then before we get into real politics, we thought we should just note that like the largest general strike in probably human history happened in India this week. And while no one really talked about it, we thought we might.
Yeah, a crowd the size of like most of America went on strike this week in India. 250 million people. That's
like if 2/3 of the United States showed up to strike.
Yeah. So that's amazing. And it's like multiple groups have started it. I mean, some of them are in response to like some immigration policies and to some policies that like the government has used like the coronavirus lockdown to like get around. There's also like a huge farm organization.
Yeah, the agricultural sector there is not kidding around.
They have been striking some specific laws that were passed by the Modi administration. They've been striking off and on for months there. So things just sort of like converged all at once there really this week, and it just like turned into like a massive, I mean, ultimately people are calling it a revolution.
Yeah. Well, I mean, 250 million people striking is that is a revolution.
Yeah.
And the imagery was great because a lot of farmers brought their like tractors and stuff. And so they were like ripping down police barricades with tractors. I mean, that's what you're looking for.
And good for them because, a lot of the actions that this government are doing are sort of like your classic kind of like, awful neoliberal conservative, like they didn't do anything worse than what we've done here in America. And 250 million people decided to do a general strike. So like, take note,
specifically about the agricultural sector. Like we're about to talk about very similar policies that were enacted in the US and much to the detriment of the Democratic Party and also just the agricultural sector in general. In India, also, it seems like one thing I was kind of reading about is their agricultural sector is sort of, like us, dominated by different classes. So there's like rich people in what they would call their like peasant sector and also what we might consider peasants in their peasant sector. But they have been fairly unified in these protests, which means that you have people from the agricultural sector of all classes.
Well, and that's interesting specifically just for India, considering their longstanding class system anyway.
Right.
So,
no, exactly.
The idea that this could bring those groups together is
and
not
it's the opposite of what we have in our agricultural sector, because what we have is big agro business squeezing out small farmers. We have parties backing agro business to the detriment of small farmers. Nobody is standing up for small farmers of any party right now.
Certainly not Tom Vilsack.
Certainly not Tom Vilsack, but we pay a lot of lip service to like protecting small farmers, and nobody is doing that.
Yeah.
And it's crazy that anybody would be able to lose the support of what is one of the most heavily subsidized industries in America. I mean, so much public subsidy goes to the agricultural sector, but we somehow have still like lost the thread. And that kind of, I mean, in India, they are seeing the entire, agricultural sector from top to bottom basically like freak out at the Modi government. So that is an interesting thing to keep an eye on.
It is. Yeah.
But also industry solidarity among sector-wide solidarity is something we don't have here that we could really, I think, learn from in this context where, we don't obviously we've lost unions in every sector, but there are unions involved in these protests in India, but there are also organizations that represent like other sectors involved that are operating like unions. And because of that, you're seeing solidarity beyond just, sort of industry solidarity emerge in these protests. And that is kind of striking.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
that is also a pun that I didn't mean to make because I used the word striking
hey.
to describe it. So that was a twofer for all of you guys. In any case, it doesn't seem like there's the problem they have is they don't have a powerful enough opposition party to take over from the BJP. So like that is politically what they're struggling with there.
Well, and interesting, Modi, while he has sort of like done some similar things to, some of the terrible leaders of the world, like, Trump and Bolsonaro and various things, he also is still like well liked in terms of how he has handled coronavirus, because it's very bad in India, but he has not pretended as though
it's not a real thing,
a conspiracy. So there's also that too, because I think while 250 million people are striking, they are also sort of like, thinking that he's maybe not doing the worst job, at least in terms of his attempts to get it under control. He hasn't been able to do so, but who has?
Well, exactly.
So,
that's
in
any case. Back to our failures. Or finally, a minor success. The COVID vaccine's on the way.
Yeah,
to a few of you.
You're not
to you, right? Not to somebody.
Yeah, which is good.
I believe I'm worried
better
it's
that
on the way.
Somebody get it than nobody get it.
That's true. I'm worried that it's on its way to Wall Street because they seem to consider themselves essential workers.
Yeah,
they've been trying to suggest that they should get early vaccines because they're so essential.
Well,
I would contend they're the least essential of any workers. Because they don't make or do anything on Wall Street.
Well, obviously, money is going to be a big part of this because it is in everything. So, I mean, I know that there is a plan to go to, essential workers, like you mentioned, and then also to, people who are living in long-term care facilities. I think initially, although that'll be interesting because like there hasn't been like an extreme amount of testing on people over 65, and there are quite a few, people have been having very adverse reactions to this. I mean, ultimately, it goes away. Sometimes only lasts 48 hours. But I mean, like the idea that somebody 80 might, feel like they have a really bad flu for 48 hours isn't great. But anyway,
I've often said of the flu shot, I'm like, I get why you need to get the flu shot. And when I've gotten the flu shot, the times I've gotten really sick from it, the most frustrating thing to hear is, but you don't really have the flu. Because you're like, I have all of the symptoms of, like, to me, this is the flu. It doesn't matter if it's not officially the flu at the cellular level. Like once I'm experiencing the flu, and I recognize that like that is better than getting the flu that you like then spread to someone.
Yeah.
You can't spread the flu shot flu. Right. So like, that's fine. But like, don't tell me, a person who has flu symptoms, that they don't have the flu and that was what makes it okay. It still makes you sad.
It does. Yeah. But shipments went out to all 50 states. They're going to get there tomorrow. There's going to be a bunch more that are going out on Tuesday. I think all in, it's like 2.9 million doses. And then there's going to be more coming after that. Also, they're using UPS and FedEx to ship them. So that it's like, could they not have, paid the U.S. Postal Service to do this?
Like the USPS is somehow like not able to ship things it's the only thing they do.
Yeah. So that's annoying. Anyway, but this is the Pfizer one. It just got approved
this week.
You were probably tracking this one. Yeah, I think all of them have to be kept cold, but this is the one that has to have to be kept cold in ways that like colder than places are used to having to keep things. So that's the tricky thing about this specific one. The Moderna one is not that. It still has to be kept cold, but it's in like the typical freezer that like a hospital or doctor's office would have, or a pharmacy would have. And that is going to be going through FDA approval this week and could start shipping soon after that. So it's not going to be too much longer before we have two in the mix here.
Yeah, which is
so that's great.
Exciting, and means that one day, years from now, you might get a vaccine for the coronavirus. I mean, I do feel like one area where I'm sure we're going to watch ourselves fail as other countries succeed is in having used this time to develop an infrastructure for delivering these kinds of vaccines. And not that, they're probably going to eventually get them at CVS and you can get them at CVS, but there's going to be a cost to someone somewhere that is going to differentiate haves and have-nots on the vaccine front, because that's how all American healthcare works. Well, and so relying on private companies to distribute it is going to have drawbacks, because it is not going to allow us to prioritize the people most in need in a way that other countries are going to be able to. And they're going to have, in like Germany, they're like constructing buildings to like give these vaccines in. And in the US, it's going to be like, well, if your local CVS doesn't have a COVID safe way for you to wait in line, then maybe you just die on your way to the vaccine.
Yeah. Well, and also not only that, I mean, obviously, we're specifically worried about, how we are going to get it here in America. And you were just talking about how we don't have an infrastructure, but I was also I heard a story on NPR this week also where, so many poorer countries who are
totally
are going to have trouble because so many of the rich companies or countries have already paid for so many of these, even though they haven't even been produced yet. Like the US, I think, has paid for enough doses to vaccinate every single person twice. Canada has prepaid for like enough to vaccinate everybody like 3 times, ditto the UK. And so like there's all these countries who I think now are sort of like trying to get into like a coalition with each other, and they're sort of like lobbying, I think, like the UN for money or whatever. But like, I mean, there are going to be people who lose out on this, and it's going to be people or countries who don't have any money, and that is not how it should be, but that's how it always is. So here
capitalism.
Yep.
That's well, and this is a perfect example of where capitalism fails us, I think, because I feel like there's this incentive to believe that things that, because I think partly because America feels like a land of bounty in myth, that capitalism isn't a zero-sum game. Progressives say this to me all the time, and I rail about it in life and on the podcast. So you've probably heard me say this, but like capitalism is literally the definition of a zero-sum game. It is an artificial zero-sum game where we create a certain amount of money, and then when you give it to someone else, you can't have it anymore. So when Jeff Bezos gets all the money, the rest of us fight for less, and then some annoying person tells us it's not a zero-sum game as we're fighting for scraps, and then we wonder why everyone becomes a warring faction of idiots. And it is because we like are living in the definition of a zero-sum game. And this is kind of like the vaccine thing is going to operate like that, where it's like
totally
there are going to be haves who get all the vaccines, but there are only a certain number of vaccines. And if we think money is the thing that we need to, like that buying the vaccines is how the vaccine should get distributed, then a bunch of people who are going to have less of the monetary resource needed to acquire vaccines are going to be fighting for less. And they're probably going to be squabbles over it that could have been prevented. And there's probably going to be deaths that could have been prevented.
Yeah.
Because that's life in capitalism. And that is why, if you look at the photos of me from my last day of high school, everyone else is just dressed like a responsible person. And I am wearing a Che t-shirt.
Yeah.
I feel like I got to socialism before all these kids on TikTok, though, so I'm feeling good about that.
Oh my God, TikTok, and also just like our friend group now. We were talking about that this week.
I think we've been a great influence on people, Brent.
I mean, listen, I shouldn't take all the credit, but I'm going to do so anyway.
Why not?
Because why not? Like, which of their other friends have been telling them how great and wonderful socialism is?
Nobody.
I mean, they may have figured it out on their own or by just the shitstorm
living in an
America
oppressive society. I don't know.
Yeah. But nonetheless, like how many people are sharing things about how terrible capitalism is, and talking about like,
people are edging close to modern monetary theory all over the internet, talking about how money's not real. And I feel like if you are somebody who exists in Brent's world, he's the person who told you about modern monetary theory. No one else is walking around chatting about Stephanie Kelton to the level that Brent is. That's just not a thing that's happening out there. So I feel like that had to, at least by osmosis, have come indirectly from Brent.
Yeah, thank you. I'll take it.
Yeah,
I'll take it. Modern. You can have the influence on socialism, and I'll take the influence on modern monetary theory.
I'm here to tell them about Medicare for all.
Right.
Or single-payer healthcare, as those of us in the world call it. And you're here to talk about how money's not real. And we're all doing the right thing, is the point.
Yeah. Before we get off of COVID, because we're not going to talk about how terrible it is, because you're alive.
Right. You've heard about it.
But we found out Devin Nunes this week had it because he tested positive for the antibody. So he went and like did plasma. Now we don't know when. We don't know the details of all of this. So like I would like to start the theory now that he was like the congressional patient zero.
Yeah. Because he's one of those people that's been out there spreading his germs to everyone, thinking coronavirus is not a real thing.
Right. In March, he was like, you have to go out and like live your life at the same time that all the public, like he was an early adopter to don't listen to public health experts.
Yeah.
Which is how he ended up with coronavirus. But like, so I think we should all blame him.
I don't see why not. There's
at least for the outbreak in Congress.
I've been trying to blame him for years for things. And I feel like this is a time that we finally can get one to stick.
No one can prove that that is untrue.
That's right. Yeah. And that, I think, if you're trying to win an argument with people that you're also hoping to frustrate beyond belief, a great way to do it is to ask them to prove something isn't true. Because it's impossible to prove something isn't true. You can prove something is true, but being asked to provide evidence that something didn't happen is impossible. It's the Trump administration does it all the time. This is what infuriates. If you're ever wondering why certain people infuriate you when you're arguing with them and you can't figure out what it is, it's almost always because they're using that argument. They get you into a bind where you're like, well, I can't prove something didn't happen, but there's no way to say that either. Then you sound like you're whining. And so you can't.
Yeah.
Let's use that on them.
Yeah.
That's my point. In any case, we have an update on the stimulus, which is that we don't have any updates on the stimulus, except for that it's gotten more confusing because, so we know the bill in Congress has no stimulus checks and everyone's mad about it.
Yes.
Including one Bernard Sanders and Josh Hawley, who's like, for some reason become like a hero, a hero of the left. I don't mean that for real, but there are two things that he's up to right now. One is hating Facebook and one is advocating for stimulus checks.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about Josh Hawley later. I mean, Josh Hawley proving the point that we have been making for decades. And we mentioned this last week again too, but let's beat a dead horse about it. The left and the fringe right can get some things done if they pick the right things to get done.
That's right. They could end the war in Yemen.
Yep.
They could be getting us stimulus checks. These are things that have no party, you guys.
Right. Exactly.
What they are doing is taking on the status quo.
That's right.
And what does the left and right like more than taking on the status quo?
That's it.
We all love doing that.
Come on.
In any case, there are no stimulus checks in the current bill that's in Congress. There's minimal, there's liability protection for businesses. The minimal unemployment aid that was extended for 12 million people ends on December 26th. So that's a mess. Sure. Housing protections are expiring everywhere. Everybody's about to be homeless. That's a mess. Yep. Everyone is feeling the financial burn right now. I think 6 in 10 people say that they've had an increase in hardship in the last month. Job growth has slowed. There's concerns that the quote unquote economic recovery that never actually was in the first place is going sour. And so the Trump administration thought we should do something and put their own bill into the mix.
Right.
That just has muddied the waters further.
Right. Because it's almost the exact same price tag. Right. Because I think the bill that was in Congress was like $908 billion. And now
and this is
$916 billion. And basically all it does is swap out the unemployment aid for like a smaller direct payment stimulus check.
It has $600 stimulus checks, but it cuts the unemployment aid from $180 billion to $40 billion, which is like this. First of all, this lame bill that they were considering in the first place had already cut the unemployment aid. This was not $600
additional to $300. They'd cut it in half.
Right. They'd cut it in half. But then this is asking you to take a one-time, and this is like when airlines ask you whether you want to take a one-time payout versus this asks you to swap an ongoing additional $1,200 a month in unemployment money for a one-time $600 payout.
Right.
Fuck off.
Yeah.
And it includes the liability shield. So then when they force you to go to work, you can't sue the company for killing you.
Yeah.
In any case, Sanders and Hawley say that they're going to force a vote on just a clean stimulus funding bill.
And Sanders has signaled that he is willing to let the government shut down, even though he doesn't want the government shut down. But they've just had to pass a short-term spending bill for a week, because I think actually Rand Paul was about to let it shut down because of the money that was in the money that was in there for military. But there's a lot of people who are threatening to shut down the government right now.
On the right and left, everyone's
we'll have to stay through Christmas, and he's just sort of we can't not help people right now.
It's so wild to me that every single person in Congress is not let's do direct payments.
Yeah.
They all have voters.
Yeah.
You know who love free money?
Right.
Voters.
I know.
You know who pay you the money to pay them free money?
Yeah.
Voters.
Even John Ossoff is tweeting about this on a daily basis.
Right. And that man has no ideas.
Yeah.
No. And also, we just found out that 3 of the richest billionaires are in a position to pay no income tax this year. So it is literally us that we're asking you to give us our money back, because the people that you're giving it to don't pay you any money.
Yeah.
So in any case, direct payments, you guys, this should be a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Both parties can take credit. They'll both love it. Everyone's going to be happy about it. The number of people who voted for Donald Trump because they got a stimulus check is astronomical.
For sure.
So just do it. Just don't even worry about it.
God.
In any case.
So
we might finally be able, we hinted at this earlier, but we might finally be able to stop talking about all of these frivolous court cases that Donald Trump is trying to steal the election with, because the Supreme Court finally took the sort of mother of all of those cases, which the Texas AG and / resident idiotic person, Ken Paxton, had brought to them, trying to sue other states for letting Biden win their elections, I guess.
For certifying their election results.
Yeah. And then all of these other states and all these other attorney generals joined. 19 other attorney generals joined, but then 22 joined the opposite.
Yeah.
Joined the
Democratic states joined
the Democrat. What is everyone do? 126 House members joined.
Yeah.
To ask for other states to not certify the rightful winner of their election because you're mad that it's like literally their theory is just like, well, if the votes aren't for Donald Trump, they're not legitimate.
Yes.
Basically. And that's not democracy, you guys.
Yeah.
Also, what happened to their states' rights business?
Well, that's
they're
the
always
thing.
asking us to butt out when they're trying to voter suppress. Why can't they can't butt out of Pennsylvania's elections after Pennsylvania has been asked to butt out repeatedly of Texas trying to suppress the right to vote of every single person in America.
Right. I mean, that's the thing that sort of like strikes me as insane about this, because like, look, there's a lot of hypocrisy in politics. I get it. You know, you'll say one thing about a specific thing, and then 4 years later, you'll say a different thing about the same specific thing. But this specific hypocrisy, I feel like, is different to me because it really is going against what you actually claim to stand for as a party. Like what is
values?
Right. Like what is the Republican Party if not a party who thinks that every state should be able to conduct their own elections? Truly, this sort of
and has taken advantage of that repeatedly to try to pass laws that prevent their own citizens from voting.
Totally.
And then told the U.S. government to butt out.
Yes.
To the extent that we had to pass a special bill to monitor half of them so that they wouldn't do this to an extent that violated the civil rights of the people in their state.
Yeah. I almost said it would be like the Democrats claiming that they are all of a sudden anti-government, but I feel like we've done that already.
Yeah, we're past.
So I couldn't think of a good analogy for what the Democrats
Well, the Democrats
would do that would be similar, because the Democrats have already abandoned all of their core values as a party. So
exactly, everyone is complicit in this problem. While I am
not our parties anymore, right?
Well, I'm frustrated that the Republicans are violating something so dear to them, but I'm not here to suggest that the Democrats are somehow like a moral compass to follow.
No,
certainly not. The funny part of all of this was that Donald Trump is obviously really sad about it because he's a sore loser. So he skipped his own Christmas party to tweet about how mad he was. He literally at the last minute just no-showed his own Christmas party that was being held in the building he lives in, and decided to instead sit at home and tweet about how sad he is that the Supreme Court didn't let him steal the election.
Yeah, and also it's important to note that not only did they not let him steal the election, what they didn't let him do was even file the case.
Well, the case was
right.
Texas cannot file a case being mad about what Pennsylvania is up to.
Right, exactly. So it was like 7-2 because Alito and
the other two were just Alito and Thomas were like, you can file the case.
Right, sure. Well, like we'll throw you a bone here, but like also you're not getting anything else from us. So it was like it wasn't like it was some sort of like scandalous weird 5-4 decision with Roberts joining the Democrats, and well that would still be 5-4 Republicans now since it's actually 6-3. Right. But like nobody on that court, including all of Trump's nominees, were having any of this.
Well, and I want to make a point, which is that the Supreme Court, this is the fallacy in his reasoning. And I think it's because he watched Bush v. Gore and thought, you can steal an election with the Supreme Court. That's fine. The Supreme Court has an incentive to maintain at least a basic level of functioning governance because their lifetime appointment only works if we continue to follow some of the basic principles that we've laid out in the Constitution. Right. Now, I know that I disagree with them on basically everything that's written there. That's fine. But Amy Coney Barrett does not have any job security if Donald Trump is a dictator, because once loyalty to him is the only qualification for a job, you don't have any job security because he decides he's loyal to a new person every day of the week, or right. disloyal to a new person. I mean,
right? No, yeah, he's about ready to fire a Bill Barr right now. So
exactly, there's no way for them to support him overturning like basic election law and essentially us entering an autocracy, sorts, because then they lose their jobs too. They're not fools. I mean, they're fools, but they're not fools in the highest level of fooldom. They're only medium fools.
Yeah.
In any case, Biden has also been appointing new cabinet members to convince us that he's the only reason we're accepting this is just because he's not Donald Trump.
Yeah.
First of all, he appointed Susan Rice to the Domestic Policy Council, which is so insane because she's literally like a foreign policy person.
Yes.
And he was like, her experience with logistics will help. But it's like, maybe someone with experience with domestic programming would be helpful.
Yeah.
Maybe it's only because it's not a Senate confirmed appointment and she was never going to get through the Senate. And
probably not.
He desperately wanted to appoint her to something. He's been trying to appoint her for months to some kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there's that. He made, just after we finished recording the podcast last week, appointed Javier Becerra to head HHS, which is, look, I have two feelings about this.
Yes.
One, what an insane thing to do. Two, I'm not mad because Becerra is a Medicare for All supporter. So, but it's so weird. He's an attorney general.
Right. I think the thought anyway was that he has brought and filed some cases as the attorney general of the state of California, like to try and save the Affordable Care Act, like in times when that has been in question.
Would say that that's not the job of the head of HHS.
Well, now, I agree with you.
Like I said, I'm fine because I'm ready to have some new ideas in HHS. But HHS is a public health agency, and your job there is to oversee public health policy, and you would ostensibly want a public health background beyond being a lawyer who works on public health adjacent cases.
Well, yeah, I mean, the people who had been talked about for this was like, I know Michelle Lujan Grisham supposedly was somebody who they were thinking about for this. She is the former, I think she's either a doctor or something, but I mean, like she had been the public health leader in New Mexico before she became the governor, before she went to Congress, actually. So like the other people that were being talked about for that, I don't even think anybody had Becerra on a list.
No, he was not on a short list. He was not on any kind of list. He was just a guy. And like I said, I've liked him as attorney general, and I will be sad to lose him as attorney general in California. I was hoping that he was in the mix for Senate, because if we were not going to go with my first choice, which would be one of the older ladies in Congress, like a Karen Bass or Barbara Lee, I was hoping that someone like Becerra might be appointed. But this is really weird.
Yeah, it was a weird.
Is all I can say. And it's a weird fit. And I don't know what the logic of it is. And I am curious because we have like a real public health crisis on our hands. Like like HHS has like a really big job ahead of it. And that is the agency that's responsible for a lot of the public health policy that is going to have to get us out of the COVID crisis. And to appoint someone who's not experienced on the, sort of policy and communication side of public health is bizarre. But here we are. The DOD situation is a mess. He wants to appoint a retired general, Lloyd Austin.
But he's only been retired for 4 years.
Right. And so there is a rule that you are not so ideally in the intention of the way our government was set up, and the intention of having a cabinet member run the military is that we have civilian control of the military. I think anyone who works within the military would tell you that that's a really important facet of keeping the military in check and under appropriate governance. And so a lot of people are really concerned. So we have a rule that says that you have to be out of the military for at least 7 years before you can be appointed to this role.
Yeah.
So he needs a special waiver. And they just did that waiver for Mattis.
We just did it. Right. Yeah. And a lot of Democrats were like, we're never doing this again. This is a bad idea. We shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah. And now they're being asked to do it by a Democrat, which means that they're either going to have to go back on their previous statements about this. And this is not something like once everyone is having to get a waiver every time for the head of DOD, there is no rule anymore, meaningfully speaking. Right. Like once we're in the habit of just granting these waivers willy-nilly, there's not really a meaningful rule. But we're seeing a sort of interesting coalition of people say that they are not interested in granting this waiver. Tammy Duckworth, notably, she's a veteran.
She's a vet, yeah.
She said, I would support Lloyd Austin, but I don't support giving him the waiver.
Yeah.
And she's conservative. She's not somebody who necessarily policy-wise disagrees with him, but she was just like, the waiver itself is the problem. Tom Cotton doesn't want to give him the waiver. Sure. Dick Blumenthal, who is on the Armed Services Committee, doesn't want to give him a waiver. John Tester, who also didn't support the waiver for Mattis, is like, I don't support the waiver because I don't support these waivers. Brian Schatz, who is just like a nice person in the House and wears a lei in his profile picture, doesn't support the waiver. And one interesting thing about this is the House and Senate have to vote on this waiver. So this is no longer just an issue of what the Senate will approve.
Yeah.
But in any case, like we said.
And also, and Jack Reed, who's the top Democrat on the Armed Services panel, like that's the person that I've been seeing the most this week, because he gave sort of like a fairly impassioned, at least as far as Jack Reed goes, who's I don't know has ever done anything with much passion anyway. He's fairly boring.
He's passionate.
But like talked about on the Senate floor, gave a speech about how this was the last time that he would be doing it when he voted for Mattis in the Trump administration. So,
but he's also gone on the record recently saying that he would support the waiver.
So there you
go. He's the Democratic leader of the Armed Services Committee. Or the top Democrat in the Armed Services Committee. And he expressed some openness to the idea of the waiver, even though he is the person whose remarks we're all using to justify not giving the waiver. So the Democrats have no backbone and they're a mess.
Yeah.
But so I think the other thing that everyone is going on about is this would be a historic appointment because he's Black and this would be the first Black defense secretary. And while that is a great thing, I would note that there are just millions of Black civilians out there.
But here's the question: Were those Black civilians? Right. Were those Black civilians that you're speaking of somehow in the Obama administration?
No, and I think that's where we're getting. So of course, obviously, it seems as though in order to work in the Biden administration, you have to have worked in the Obama administration and then also potentially in the Clinton administration. So if you're interested in, as I think it was Anand had a great tweet about it where he was like, for young people interested in working in the Biden administration, my advice is go back in time and work in the Obama administration. It feels like this is something that we talked about last week. It's all well and good to appoint people who have historically not been represented in roles to roles like this. But if you're using it to shield appropriate criticism about other questions about that individual person's background, that's not it. Like we should have a Black defense secretary, but as I've said, there are just millions of civilians out there who are Black and also not people who maybe would need a special waiver to do this job and would maintain civilian control of the military. And maybe one of those people could also have been a historic first, but also not compromise important values that we hold dear about civilian control of the military and a separation between military leadership and government.
Yeah.
But so,
it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out.
It will be interesting. Yeah, it seems like the Republicans will support him, so maybe they'll be fine, but I'll be mad about it. So they'll have to deal with that, with the wrath of me. In any case, the bigger wrath, I'm saving the bigger wrath for the USDA.
Yes, as you should. Please, wrath away.
Fucking Tom Vilsack, former Iowa governor, former head of the USDA, former lobbyist for Big Agro, is who they decided would be the head of agriculture instead of the one thing that we agreed with Jim Clyburn on this year is that Marcia Fudge should have been the head of agro. And instead, she was appointed to be the head of HUD, which is a job that her only qualification for seems to be being Black, because as she rightly pointed out, what it was last month.
She gave a very recent interview after she was like being mentioned for some of these these jobs in the cabinet, she said, we're going to have to stop looking at only certain agencies as those that people like me fit in. You know, it's always, we want to put the Black person in labor or HUD.
Yeah. She is the person who was qualified to be the head of agriculture.
Yes.
And while I'm happy to have her be anywhere, it is a little bit weird that they made her the head of HUD, which is an agency
that would have been,
she doesn't have any particular affinity or interest in.
And that would have been a historic appointment also that wouldn't have needed a special waiver for her to have been appointed.
If you are taking the Clyburn criticism that your cabinet is not diverse enough seriously, maybe one great way to do it is to appoint qualified people to positions where they would also be historic firsts. Just an idea from me, but you know, I think it's a pretty good one. Tom Vilsack can go fall in a well, though. This is like just a rerun of more pro-corporate policies. And, you know, we were talking at the top of the podcast about some of the ways in which agriculture and specifically small farmers get fucked by Democratic administrations. Totally. And Vilsack is like the epitome of that problem. Because when you hear, like, you'll hear two things about the agri industry. One is that they get too many subsidies, and that is true when you are talking about big ag. And the other is that small farmers are suffering, and that is also true.
Yeah, and there's a lot of small farmers who are people of color also.
Yes.
Those racial disparities within agriculture are huge. And so like that's also why it would have been good to have Marcia Fudge, and also why you've been reading a lot of reports this week that like a lot of coalitions of Black farmers are fucking pissed.
Well, and as they should be, because one thing that I think people don't think about the Department of Agriculture's reach regarding like a number of issues that are incredibly important to liberals, progressives, everyone. Climate change. They have a lot of control over policies that affect climate change.
Totally.
Protecting the food supply, which is something that we only recently learned was of critical importance during the COVID crisis as regular lay people living in cities. But protecting the food supply and dealing with food distribution and how, you know, food safety and the safety of people who work in factories that produce food, all of these things are under agriculture. Addressing racial disparities, because Black farmers have an incredibly hard time getting loans. They have an incredibly hard time receiving equal treatment under the nation's agriculture subsidy policies. This is a way that you can address racial disparities in more than just cities, which, because obviously those exist everywhere. And the Department of Agriculture is who has control over that. So here's some information about Tom Vilsack for those of you who haven't been following his reign of terror as closely as maybe Brent and I have, just because he was an Iowa person. So we had him on our radar in the Obama years. So he, after he left the Obama administration, immediately went to go work for Big Dairy. So he's a lobbyist right now. So that's just one thing to know in your mind. But also he had this moment where he like expressed some vague ambitions early in the Obama years. He decided that he was going to be in charge of all of these sweeping reforms back in 2010, and then he filibustered his own sweeping reforms. They went and did this. So Obama had been promising on the trail to take on big ag. He was doing it in Iowa during the caucuses. He was doing it at the start of his presidency. And then Vilsack went on this like listening tour with the DOJ to hear what farmers were saying. And farmers were like, big ag is a fucking nightmare. And they were like, we hear you. So they decided to update this, the Packers and Stockyards Act, which is an anti-monopoly law from 1921 that established fair codes of conduct in the livestock industry. And they had promised these sweeping changes to it that were going to update it and make it effective and blah, blah, blah. He, as the head of agriculture, had the authority to finalize these rules, and then got a lot of pushback from Big Ag, from the congressional members supported by Big Ag, and decided to expand the comment period into so that it would go past the midterm elections in 2010, which is when the Tea Party took over. And so he basically filibustered them because at that point it couldn't get through any legislature and it was just dead.
Yeah.
And then he introduced like right before he left office, like a really watered down thing about regulations to protect mistreatment for work, or to protect meat packers from mistreatment. But it was like the Trump administration dissolved it and the office that enforced the Packers and Stockyards Act as soon as they took office. So basically he at the very last made a sad attempt to do nothing.
I was going to say, considering what we've had going on in the meatpacking plants this year. It would have been nice. It would have been nice to have had some of those things put into actual law.
It's so true. Yeah. And he's a man who had the power to do that until he decided not to have the power to do that.
Yeah.
But also, he's somebody who had been talking a big game about all the civil rights advances under his agriculture department. But he has also a kind of questionable record on that. First of all, so there was one case where a civil servant asked him to support a Senate bill that was going to extend the statute of limitations on a bunch of civil rights complaints that had come through USDA that had expired during the Bush years. And he did nothing, and the bill died on the Senate floor. But then also the USDA foreclosed on a bunch of Black farmers whose cases were still under review under these civil rights complaints. And then also, we should note that the USDA is just like significantly more likely to foreclose on Black farmers anyway. 6 times more likely during his tenure. And so that's just a side fact of what was already a big problem inside the USDA. But also, there was this like ridiculous thing that had to do with Breitbart, where he ousted Georgia's USDA Rural Development Director, who was somebody who was a bit of a civil rights leader in Georgia, Shirley Sherrod, based on a bunch of Breitbart claims that were not true. And that was something that actually civil rights leaders told Biden might jeopardize these jeopardize the elections in Georgia, jeopardize the Democrats' chances in Georgia for these Senate runoffs that we're going to be having in January. So Tom Vilsack is like a direct line to like Georgia being pissed off. And listen, he's a pro-corporate guy. If you're wondering why an industry that is as heavily publicly subsidized as agriculture cannot get votes for Democrats, it is because the Democrats routinely fuck over small farmers, just as the Republicans do. Nobody is looking out for small farmers of any party. And even though they talk a big game, everyone knows, because they have seen with their eyes how these things operate. Farming is difficult. It operates on small margins. It's incredibly dangerous. You know, for small farmers, getting healthcare is incredibly expensive, and no one's doing anything about it. And Democrats come in and promise all these reforms, and then they do nothing, and they allow even more market share to go to big ag, and they allow even more control to go to big businesses that are controlling the industry. And then they wonder why the Trump movement has legs in rural America. And it's like, well, everyone's fucking pissed off.
Right.
You know, like and then on top of that, they allow these practices to drive people of color out of the industry, because a big issue is, you know, the number of Black farmers has dropped between like 1930 and 1997. I saw some stat that it had dropped like 90% or something like that. I mean, we are in the business of not supporting small farmers of color in even the most basic ways. But like, it's crazy because we pump a lot of money into subsidizing this industry, and we don't do it in a way that protects the people in the industry, which is insane to do. It's an insane, why do anything if you're not going to protect the people who are doing the thing you're trying to have done?
Yes.
Common sense.
Well said.
In any case, I say that as somebody who's lived in huge cities my whole life, but just like anyone, thinks that, you know, maybe small farmers deserve a fair shake too. Just in any case.
Well, what's interesting though is because Marcia Fudge is going to get, or was nominated for HUD, she still has to get confirmed. But obviously that opens up her House seat. She is from Ohio. She's from a very blue district. I remember when this got redistricted, she ended up running for re-election, or in the primary anyway, against Dennis Kucinich.
Right.
Remember that?
Oh yeah, that was chaos.
So, and that was chaos because we're like, oh my God, it's two huge progressives, and like either of them are going to win the general election because this specific district is the bluest district in town.
Right.
Like whoever wins the Democratic primary in this district is going to go to Congress here, right? So interestingly, we've got a real delightful person who's going to run, and God, I want her to go to Congress. I mean, what a world. What a
world.
Turner, hello somebody.
Yes. Has just filed or is about to file. Did she file? I think that she had just
officially filed. She hasn't like made like an announcement like that she's doing it and like launched a campaign, but she like filed the papers.
You guys, this is a real dream come true for those of us that love a little drama in our lives. Because totally. Nina Turner is straight theater at all times.
Totally.
In the best possible way.
I mean, beyond.
She wears crazy outfits.
Yeah.
She says things that are categorically true, but with a lot of drama and flair.
Yep.
She, I feel like, might oust Rashida Tlaib as the most unpredictable member of the squad.
For sure. Unequivocally,
she's
yes.
Highly unpredictable. But in another way, so entertaining that you definitely want to see her speak.
I know. I love her. Also, when she filed the papers, she filed it. Her committee is called Nina Turner for Us, but like it's capitalized, so it's like U.S. But obviously, that's a play on the Not Me Us.
Not Me Us.
Which I was like, so she already knows exactly what she's doing here.
Right, straight Bernieing it.
Right.
So this is just like our dream election.
I mean,
come to life.
Truly. And you know, she's gonna raise all of Earth's money for this race. I mean,
yeah, as she should.
She send out one fundraiser email and she'll be set for the entire campaign.
Right. And that's what we're looking for.
Yeah.
What we're looking for is also, this is actually like a great showing just in general, because she is going to be able to send a fundraising email and raise tons of money in small dollar donations, where she's going to be a really big player all of a sudden in this race. Yep. And that is what we want, is to be like, hey, you can do this without taking the corporate money.
Yep.
You can enter the race. And if you're a principled person that people are excited about, then you can just have the money. You don't need to go talk to your corporate overlords.
Right. Exactly.
Because
this will be great for her too, because she has already hinted at potentially running for president. Which also, please God, I mean, if
what a life,
ever
what a dream.
You've answered a prayer of mine, let it be that Nina Turner runs for president. I sort of assumed that she was probably going to do it for the People's Party, because she's been very heavily involved in that, and she wouldn't probably fuss around in a Democratic primary, although that would also be a delight. But yeah, I mean,
I'm here for it. I'm here for all of it. I'm here for
totally here for
as much of it as she wants to give.
I know, exactly. And in all of the ways that I am here for that, I am not here for Terry McAuliffe running for the governor of Virginia again.
Can this man just retire and go and enjoy what is probably a nice life of not having to be the governor?
Oh, of course it would. Yeah, man has a great life.
He's got a great life. He's got
friends in high places.
Got friends in high places.
Friends with every major corporation around.
That's right. He can get a lobbying gig anywhere.
Totally. Yeah.
I mean,
probably
just
has had
go be a lobbyist and leave us alone.
Well, and that is sort of like the question that people are asking here, is why? I mean, clearly he's a man who is qualified to be the governor of Virginia, as a man who has once been the governor of Virginia, right?
But he doesn't like we tried this in California because we had a total shit show go on where a person who was categorically not qualified to be the governor became the governor, and then we needed to call in an adult to clean everything up. And so we brought Jerry Brown back.
Right.
He's not Jerry Brown vibes. Like Jerry Brown, I'm like 100% willing to vote for any office. I don't even agree with him on half, but I just like know things will be taken care of under Jerry Brown. I feel good about Jerry Brown. But that is like why you bring someone, if you're going to bring anyone back in a situation, you have to have had a major crisis, which the only crisis they've had in Virginia is that everyone's done blackface so far.
Totally.
And then also you have to be bringing in someone who like can actually clean it up, which Terry McAuliffe is categorically not.
Yeah.
Like this brings us nothing. And Virginia is like going into a deep blue state or deep blue life that is new to them. That doesn't require a bunch of compromise style Terry McAuliffe Democrats to be muddying the waters with.
Well, right. And I think also a lot of people are finding it just offensive also just because so many of the gains that have been made in the House of Delegates there and the State House that they sort of have just finally, taken back after never having had it, have been done on the backs of women and women of color in many instances. But like that one year where they like won the majority of those elections, like something like in the House of Delegates, it was like 11 of the 15 that won that year were women. And like, I mean, huge swaths of like women, and a quarter of the electorate is black. And like, look, Terry McAuliffe has some black support because he's an old Clintonite and he's been around forever and he's made good inroads with certainly the older black people in the state and older black elected officials there. But like the idea that you would need Terry McAuliffe to like come in and save the state that has already gone blue and already has a Democratic governor when there's 3 women running right now. There's 2 black women. They're all perfectly capable and experienced and members of state government.
They're all people who've been elected to things before.
Right. And it just sort of like has this vibe of like, no, it's just not your turn yet. And it fucking is.
Right.
It is their
One
turn.
person whose turn it's not anymore is Terry McAuliffe, who already got a turn.
Goodbye.
Yeah.
Sir.
Be away from us.
God.
Be away from the DNC. Be away from Virginia. Be away from all of it.
You are actively unnecessary.
Yes.
You are unneeded.
You are unneeded here.
Right.
And I would contend problematic also, because I feel like his brand of politics was a massive fail for Democrats up and down the board, all over America. When he was running the DNC, we lost things. When he was running Virginia, there were no policy advances because he was too moderate. Like, we don't need any more Terry McAuliffes.
No, but
we don't need any of these people.
I think this is going to be interesting because I think that this might be, and maybe I don't know Virginia well enough. I don't know, but this seems very much to me like at least an opportunity, and I hope the people of Virginia take it, but to actually take a stand here and really sort of like, put their stake in the ground on this, basically, because like, and it seems like they're going to. I mean, I hope that they don't have kid gloves with him, because like they don't need to screw him and Carol Foy, who is one of the members of the House of Delegates, who has already claimed that who has already announced her candidacy, was doing an interview, and she said, I think it's an affront to women and people of color who are in this race to say he can do something that we can't. And she sort of like got pressed about it. Oh, and she went on to say, she was like, he's using using the experience argument is coded language. It's a dog whistle. She noted that McAuliffe himself had no elected experience whatsoever when he ran for governor in 2009. So like, and she also went on to say, she said, I come from the poorest communities. I was raised by my grandmother. I've been a foster parent and a public defender. I've lived a life of service. I don't have wealth. So like, I think the people who are running in this race intend to tell McAuliffe the right things, the things that he needs to be told. I don't know if he'll listen. I don't think that he will, because he's already announced and he's going to pretend like he's better than all these people anyway. But like, hopefully they can, they can rid themselves of Terry McAuliffe potentially forever. I mean,
hopefully they can rid all of us of Terry McAuliffe.
All of us, right? I mean,
all of us would like to see the end of Terry McAuliffe.
Because also, if he loses this primary here, he can't. He's always pretending like he's going to go around running for president too, which we definitely don't need.
Nobody has ever needed less than America.
And we can certainly end that, I think, if he can't even win his primary for re-election in Virginia. So
let's do this right.
Yes.
The Virginia.
Yeah.
People we don't know.
Ooh, I'm excited for this next story.
Oh God. You guys, it appears as though Andrew Yang, a person that I've at times defended, has his sights on running for mayor.
Sure.
He joins a field of upwards of 1 million people who have already declared. And I could not be more #against this idea. New York City has real issues. It has real needs. It needs a serious person to be the mayor. It does not need a pro-business meme to be the mayor. And that is essentially what he would be here. For a number of reasons, I have issues with this. I would contend being the mayor is really different than being a president. It's a much more hands-on job. As a president, you're setting a sort of broad policy agenda for broad negotiations. And because of that, you can, obviously, it's better if someone who knows what they're doing is the president. But Also, you can sort of be the kind of person whose ideas are broad and then you have other people sort of like figure them out. Sure. But mayors actually need like knowledge of the community, connections to the community. Yang has never had even one iota of involvement in New York City politics. No one has ever even heard him mention that he's from New York.
All right, well, he had to call all of the like local elected leaders to be like, "Hi, I'm running for mayor,
Hi,
but also
I live in New York.
Nice to meet you. My name is Andrew Yang. We've
exactly. And this is New York. I know it sounds big because the city is big, but New York City politics is real local politics. It is about, random, it's about public schools. It's about anger between developers and certain communities. You have to know how different communities interact. And this brings me to my second point. And maybe this is a controversial point, but I don't care. After our experiment with Boston Bloomberg, I think that you should have to be a native New Yorker to be the mayor of New York. And he's from Westchester. I don't need some kid from the suburbs to come in and convince us after a lifetime of never being involved in New York City politics. And I would say that we could examine someone who has had a long involvement in New York City politics. Our Speaker of the City Council, he's my parents' city council person. He is not a native New Yorker. He thought he might run for mayor. I actually thought that was not a good idea for this very reason. But he's somebody that I know has been working in our community for a while now. So I would maybe scrub this if it was somebody, according to my own exacting specifications as a native New Yorker, who met the criteria for native enough.
Yeah.
But Andrew Yang is not that person. Andrew Yang is not somebody who, he might feel that he has a sense of his own community's issues in New York, but his own community of Hell's Kitchen is not representative of the rest of New York. And if you're not somebody who understands how the boroughs deal with the city, how they deal with each other, how the city deals with the boroughs, how the city deals with the neighborhood next to your neighborhood, then you are not a person who knows how to be the mayor of New York City. And having an understanding of what kind of like animates New York City politics is really important in the mayoral race. It's why, Anthony Weiner got a pass for a long time in that race, even though he was acting a fool for most of it, from even me, because I like Anthony Weiner, even though he's a nutbag. But it was because Anthony Weiner knew how to speak to people in New York. He really knew the community. He would get into arguments with people on the sidewalk, and he could get into it with them because he understood the dynamic that he was involved in. And Andrew Yang is not he's not part of the culture of New York in that way.
Sure.
And and Bloomberg wasn't either. And that's why I don't need a Boston Bloomberg in my life. And I don't need a Westchester Yang in my life. And I don't need any of these people to not be native New Yorkers. But beyond that, policy wise, Andrew Yang doesn't believe in zoning laws. So fuck off. If there's one thing that we're all suffering from in New York City, it is people not respecting zoning laws. And he claims that zoning laws are NIMBY. NIMBY is NIMBY. Being not in my backyard, instituting zoning policies that are discriminatory is a bad thing, but zoning laws themselves are morally neutral. You need zoning laws to protect residents from businesses too. So you can say that some zoning laws are not a good idea. And of course that's true of any kind of policy. Some healthcare policy is not a good idea, even though in general, I support us having one. But zoning laws are not by their very nature NIMBY. He is going to be pro-developer to the core. The last thing New York City needs is another pro-developer mayor after Boston Bloomberg's experiment. The one thing that I think is frustrating people about de Blasio is that these things did not change under de Blasio. We wanted this culture of developer mania to end. And I think that the reason that people are so frustrated with de Blasio is because things didn't end under him that should have ended. He promised us they would end and they didn't. And so I don't even take issue with de Blasio's platform because de Blasio offered, I understand why everyone voted for him.
Right. And there were people were excited about him. There was and I think he'll be remembered actually differently than he's being remembered right now. There's pretty much universal hatred for him right now. I think when we reflect on his time in office, we will see that he actually did institute universal pre-K, and that was actually a pretty big deal. There will be some things that he's remembered for that we're not currently in a space to deal with right now. But the last thing that we need is somebody to take up the Bloomberg mantle. And as a couple of publications and myself are pointing out, I only say a couple publications because I don't want you to think it's just me. It's not just me, but I did also say this.
He would be much more like Bloomberg than what New York City needs right now. New York City is in a budget crisis thanks to Bloomberg. There is, the school funding is falling apart. There are big housing issues in New York City. There are big public transit issues in New York City, and COVID really, took a bite out of the budget. You don't need a pro-business, pro-developer mayor in New York City right now. You need someone who's actually going to protect the regular people that live there.
Well,
and that isn't Andrew Yang. And
I agree. And that's one of the things that I actually, as you were sort of, talking to me about this the other day, actually, and then I sort of like saw the notes that you had taken on the subject, it reminded me specifically of, look, we all think Andrew Yang is fun. He's great on Twitter. He has great merch that says math on it.
I love having him on Twitter. I'm not trying to keep
having him on Twitter. He's great when he's on CNN. And also, like, UBI is probably the answer to a lot of our problems. Yeah. But, like, he is not so different. He's also dangerous in a way because
he's got a vague libertarian quality.
Libertarian qualities, and also not so vague, sort of like, DLC Clinton type things too, where his solution to everything is some sort of like fancy public-private partnership, but it just sounds different coming from him because like he's a big tech guy, so like he knows how these things work, and like he's basically is fashioning a bunch of the same old schlock that the Democratic Party has been pushing as the answer to all of our problems for the last 40 years that we know specifically are not the answer to all of our problems. So like I have, as much as I like a lot of things about Andrew Yang, the more I think about him, whether he's the mayor or whether he runs for president again or whatever, is that I think that he's tricky because he's going to sound good in a lot of ways, but is bad in so many other ways. I mean, keep in mind that like we're sitting around talking about how he's in favor of literally sending $1,200 a month to every single member of the country, but he was also not in favor of Medicare for all. He had some really sort of pretty bad immigration policies. He had, this is not a guy that if you are like not even just a lefty, but literally just a Democrat, want anywhere near the New York City mayor's office or certainly the presidency. So like, I like him, but like
I liked having him in the presidential race, and I think that's because the presidential race is really, it's a broad strokes discussion about what political ideas will be acceptable to discuss in the coming years a lot of the time. And so it's important to have some new voices and some wacky voices in the presidential debate.
100%.
Running for mayor in New York City is not a fucking joke, though. It's not a launch pad because, first of all, it's a dead end job. No mayor of New York City has ever gotten elected to do anything else. But also, it's a job that involves a knowledge of a kind of detail that Andrew Yang's career has not required him to learn about the place that he lives.
Right.
It is, New York City politics is a real Shark Tank of crazy. And I have a suspicion that while this sounds buzzy right now, I mean, I told that to my mom and she just like rolled her eyes and was like, that will never happen. Like, I feel like New Yorkers are not going to be as sort of permissive of him as I think a lot of people outside of New York were during the presidential race. I'm sure there are people who enjoyed him as a presidential race person, but I don't think that this is going to have the kind of legs inside New York where everyone is real balls to the wall, no nonsense about some of the very local issues he's not going to have a grasp of, as it maybe seems right now. So I think right now it's buzzy, but it'll probably die down pretty quick. But don't vote for Andrew Yang to be the mayor. I can't believe I'm having to tell you this, but you have literally a dozen other choices. Half of them I've never even heard of, but don't vote for him. Another person not to vote for, just while we're on the topic, Max Rose is mulling over running for mayor. And to this I say, get a life. Max Rose is a one-term congressman from Staten Island. He is my age, and he is a person that, as a person my age who grew up in my generation, snubbed me in Congress because I was a woman. Literally, I was in a room. I was one of the honored guests in that room, and all these members of Congress were coming in to take a picture with us after this Droga Act thing. And there were a few of us advocates in the room. 2 of us were female, 3 of us were male. He went and introduced himself to every male advocate and just didn't even acknowledge the female advocates until one of the male advocates was like, hey, have you met these 2? Like, that is what Max Rose is up to right now.
Gross.
So I'm not in the mood to have Max Rose. First of all, a Democrat from Staten Island is not the right person to elect to be the mayor of New York. That couldn't be more different than being from the rest of New York. But also, like, somebody who doesn't know how to like respectfully address women in a social context should maybe not be the mayor of anywhere. And I think that we
or
should
the vice president.
Or the vice president. I feel like we should elect a female mayor in New York.
Do that.
Never tried it. I feel like what could be better?
What's Cynthia Nixon up to?
Well, Maya Wiley is sort of fine. Sure. Cynthia Nixon, I feel like
I just knew she
has time to jump into the ring. Everyone else has.
Right.
There's a lot of women who are running, so just vote for one of them.
Yeah. Right.
I just feel like I'm sick of these people coming in here and thinking that, and it's all like these bro-y guys like Max Rose and Andrew Yang coming in here thinking that they can shake up the mayor's race. It's like, go home.
Yeah.
Let someone else deal. And even listen, I would handle Scott Stringer because I like Scott Stringer. Everyone knows Scott. It's fine. He's fine. Like I feel like I would be happy with him being the mayor. But I also feel like even despite his insideriness, he is a native New Yorker who like knows about the functioning of the city.
Yeah, he gets it.
These two, Max Rose, even as a congressperson, was not dealing with city politics. And Andrew Yang is just like a rando who happens to live in New York.
Yeah.
I can't with any of this. Moving on.
Oh my God, we might have a recall in California.
Californians are nuts.
Listen, I was reading the recall rules. It is too easy to get a recall here, which is part of the problem.
Anybody can cause a recall in California.
I think you have to get an amount of signatures that I think equates to 15% of whatever the electorate in that particular election was. And like, look, obviously Newsom won in a landslide here. I think he got like 62% of the vote. But like, if you're talking about 15% of the vote, like clearly there were 15% of voters in that election that did not vote for Gavin Newsom. So like, granted, you have to find enough of them that like care enough to like, sign, be one of the signatures on this. But like, people are mad at him right now. So I am not surprised that they are close because apparently they have until March 17th. There's a whole movement right now to recall Newsom. And look, I mean,
why not?
If you're somebody who like already didn't like him, then you probably really don't like him right now because you probably don't like all of the rules that he has put into place, even though, they might be helping, or maybe they're not
saving your life, but maybe they're not. Who knows?
But also, there was the whole sort of like the French Laundry thing didn't help him at all because like he already sort of like has this air of being sort of one of the liberal elites, and that sort of like certainly did not help. So like you might be a person who is really actively vehemently hating Gavin Newsom right now if you live in California and you sort of don't like him anyway. But they have until March 17th to get 1.5 million signatures, and they claim that they have 820,000 already, so they're over halfway there. So they have 3 months.
You guys don't do this. You really want to relive the Gray Davis era, and then we'll end up with a Schwarzenegger kind of governor, and then we're going to have to call Jerry Brown will be dead by then. I don't know who we're going to call to clean up the mess.
Who fixes it at that point?
Right. It's a disaster.
Yeah. If he picks someone terrible to replace Kamala Harris, I'd sign it.
That's fair. That's fair. And he probably will. So, I mean, I feel like he's not one thing that I think is frustrating about these situations is the governors are never thinking about what best serves the needs of the state. They're thinking about their own legacy. So he wants to have a legacy making pick. And what we want is him to not pick anyone of any, like we want him to pick someone to just hold the seat until we can vote.
Right.
And that you don't want to do that if you're the governor. You have no incentive to, because you're like, I want to have a legacy.
I want to pick somebody. I want to be a hero.
Exactly. So it's a mess. Speaking of messes, the National Party, you might recall that we went to the Iowa caucuses.
We did.
And you might recall us describing them as a total clusterfuck. And you might recall the media then describing them as a total clusterfuck.
Yeah.
And you might recall numerous ways in which we claimed they were a clusterfuck.
Right.
But there was a postmortem done on what exactly was the original cause of clusterfuck.
And it wasn't done by the Iowa Democratic Party, because my first reaction when I read this was like, oh, the state party just sort of like was trying to, not
put some blame
for any of this. But it was done by the former Attorney General of the state of Iowa, and then also like an international law firm. I think the Iowa Democratic Party certainly had it done, but it was done independently from the actual Iowa Democratic Party. the IDP, which we will start saying from now on because we're going to say it a lot and it's just easier to say the IDP. So that's the Iowa Democratic Party.
Right. There's the IDP, the Iowa Democrats, the DNC, the National Democrats.
Right. So anyway, so they had this huge audit done after this clusterfuck. They interviewed employees of Shadow, which was the maker of the app that they were using for the reporting, which you'll remember being an issue. They interviewed representatives from the Biden, Sanders, and Buttigieg campaigns. Interestingly, they did not interview anyone from the DNC. Guess why? The DNC refused to cooperate with, refused to be interviewed. So wouldn't even give any comment to the group that was doing this audit. They were like, no. And the reason they may have taken that route is because, as it turns out, which is the exact opposite of what you thought. If you were watching the caucus the night of, and then for the next 2 weeks that it took to get any sort of reporting as to who had won, you probably thought to yourself how incapable the Iowa Democratic Party was, how they were just a bunch of country bumpkins, and
you might have used the word yokel.
Yokel, yes. Lila has been using the word yokel as we were talking about this before the podcast. Mm-hmm. And as it turns out, go fucking figure, it was the National Party, the DNC, who was completely responsible for at least the immediate aftermath of not having results on election night. Because according to the report, the DNC demanded Shadow, the technology company who had built the app, they demanded very, very late in the game that they create this conversion tool. It was like weeks before the caucuses, so that the DNC could have real-time access to the raw numbers, because the National Party feared the app would miscalculate the results. So the DNC's data system used a different database format than what the Shadow reporting app was using. So they didn't match. So basically, when the results were coming in from the app on election night, the DNC was seeing different results than the app was giving all of the people who were on the ground, like in the boiler rooms, who were going to be reporting results. So the DNC was like, no, you can't report these results because they're wrong. But as it turns out, they weren't.
Well, I feel like in retrospect, I'm thinking about it because it's hard to remember. This was pre-COVID, so there was not a weird. This was not a weird election night. It was a completely typical thing that Iowans do every 4 years. Right. Like Iowans are used to caucusing, and caucuses are silly. And no matter how you do it, someone doesn't know how to count in the room, and somebody's not giving the directions right, and someone's arguing with somebody from an Amy Klobuchar campaign about something. But generally, Iowans do this every 4 years, and it's a huge deal there, and they know how to do it.
Right.
And the whole time I just kept thinking, like, it is as if they have never had a caucus before. Like, the incompetence is staggering to the degree that I do not believe that this thing that they are famous for is a thing they've ever tried once.
Yep.
And so it is now, I think, a much more logical explanation to realize that the Iowans who do this every 4 years, and famously so, knew exactly what they were doing.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the National Party came in and tried to ruin everything by thinking they knew more about a thing that Iowans are actually like specialists at.
Yeah, exactly. We found out specifically that the state party's app never malfunctioned. It was never hacked. And also, had the DNC literally just stayed out of it that night, we would have got a lot of reporting. Now, we do know that there were people who were sort of like not improperly, but like were not trained enough on the app. I mean, from the room that we were in, the person who was running the caucus site that night did not look like a person who probably had a phone that you could even put an app on. I mean, that was a person.
He's not someone who has yet spoken to someone on Zoom during this pandemic.
Right, exactly. So, however, that is also at least in part to blame by the National Party, because they were, in that respect, they were heavily involved in the construction of that app and were making changes to it very late in the game. And you'll probably be able to guess why they were so worried about that app. And this is just fucking classic DNC shenanigans. They were really concerned about foreign election interference because of the 2016 election.
Also, I would contend that
it was delayed. It was delayed multiple times. So like they couldn't train people on it because it kept getting delayed. So the reason that we weren't getting some of the reporting from the apps in the amount that we should have been that night was because people didn't know how to use it, but it wasn't necessarily because they were idiots or because the state party didn't train them. It was literally because it was just getting fucked with until the last minute.
Yeah. Also, I would contend that a caucus is the stupidest thing for a foreign entity to interfere in the world, because it's a completely nonsensical system anyway. Yeah. It's not like an election where you can just tamper with the numbers. There's like people that were witnesses in every single room. Well, right. Like, there are too many witnesses to a caucus. It's not a private ballot or a secret ballot. Everyone knows how everyone voted. Everyone knows the counts of the room that they were in. Yeah. Like, it's not, that's not where the foreign interference comes in. I don't feel like anyway. Like, who would even know how to hack a caucus? Who even knows what's going on at a caucus? Yeah,
even if
we were watching it, we didn't have any idea what was happening.
Well, right. I know, exactly. Yeah, it's just so crazy. But like, you know, I thought the sort of like, at least as far as the DNC goes, the most damning part. This report said, if the DNC had not interjected itself into the results reporting process based on its erroneous data conversion, caucus night could conceivably have proceeded according to the IDP's initial plan. So basically, like, had the DNC literally just like not been meddling, we would have known, at least in part, who won the caucuses literally on caucus night, and we didn't even fucking know for weeks.
No, and also that is how all caucuses in the past have proceeded. Like, this has not come up this way before.
Right. Yes. No, it hadn't.
The IDP knows how to do a caucus.
Right. So
they're professional caucus holders.
Nevada used the same shadow app and managed to report results later that night. It was late, but like, we knew who won Nevada. That it was a blowout, so it wasn't hard to know. Right. But I mean, you know, I mean, like, it's not as if other states who had caucuses had similar problems. It was just the DNC got this back end coding wrong that they added 2 weeks before the night of. So when they were looking at results, they were not seeing the same thing, but it was actually their own fault.
Yeah. That's
so annoying.
So
it was just last week that you and I were like shit talking the Iowa Democrats because they couldn't. How could we allow them to pick candidates because they couldn't run a caucus? They're still doing bad at picking candidates. But
well, right, they shouldn't be picking. That's an area where our criticism was correct.
It was correct, but I mean, I don't necessarily think that like the Iowa. We were making that argument as part of a broader argument that the Iowa Democratic Party is in shambles, and perhaps it only partially is.
Well, also looking at their history, two things that they have consistently done are hold caucuses effectively, and then also appoint the worst possible candidates.
Right, and they're continuing to do both of those things. So they're functioning just as they should.
They're functioning as they do. Some of that is not effective functioning, and I would contend that being good at holding a caucus is no great brag, because caucuses are insane. But it's something. I mean, they are effectively doing the two things that we are saying they're doing.
Right, exactly. Yes. Oh man.
Poor Iowa.
Boy, I know. Sure. Huh. Yeah. I guess. I don't know.
Maybe I don't. It's also, maybe let's scrap the whole thing and just all vote on the same day.
Or that. Oh boy. Oh my God. This is kind of exciting, guys. Movement on the breakup of Facebook. Who had this on their 2020 bingo card for late in the year? Not me.
Nobody.
Yeah.
I guess we could have led with this instead of ice dancing, but I think the ice dancing news is probably the most important news of the week.
Right. No, I think it was. I'm glad we started with that. Yeah. But there's a federal antitrust, or the federal antitrust authorities, and then dozens of states, and by dozens I mean literally all of them except Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and South Dakota, filed lawsuits last week to break up Facebook. Like,
I mean,
wow.
Let's do it. This feels to me like something that we should all be unified on. You don't need to be a Republican or Democrat to know we should break up Facebook.
No, you don't. Well, this is the story that we hinted at earlier that Josh Hawley was, again, sort of like on the right side of.
You just need to be a human person.
Right, but it was actually one of the Republicans sided with the two Democrats on the FTC to move the suit forward, because that was one of the holdups that you know could have caused this, at least in terms of the the federal lawsuit not moving forward. The states could have filed, but the fact that they seem to be sort of like working in coordination with each other, at least enough to sort of like file around a similar time, means that I think everybody involved in this means business. I think Facebook should be scared here.
They should, and they deserve to be. And also them claiming that though they're literally monitoring traffic on other social media platforms, that they are not operating in anti-competitive ways is insane. That's insane.
Yeah, well, and I mean, we've seen this because Zuckerberg has been asked this, in congressional hearings about,
right.
We saw him question specifically about sort of, the purchase of WhatsApp and Instagram and how, but we know that they have emails going back over a decade that, it's better to buy than to compete, and
right.
specifically with both of those platforms. So, this should really be a no-brainer, actually. And I do think the public sentiment on this has moved a lot. I think we can thank Elizabeth Warren in large part for a lot of that, who has been talking about breaking up these big tech companies for a long time, and she certainly talked about it on the campaign trail. But I think New York was one of the states certainly, and Tish James, the Attorney General there, has really been going for it on this front. But she said no company should have this much unchecked power.
Tish James was sort of tacked to the right in the election because Zephyr Teachout was her competition. And so we were all kind of like, oh, Tish James won. But Tish James, I forgot, was also someone we really liked before she tacked to the right to compete against Zephyr Teachout. And I feel like she's killing it out there.
Yeah.
In any case, let's break up Facebook.
Let's break up Facebook, guys.
Let's break up Facebook and then also get off social media so that we never have to see the clip of Louis Gohmert's tooth falling out during an interview.
I will say I haven't put Facebook on my new phone. I feel good about that.
Oh, I don't have Facebook on my phone. I took it off like 2 months, maybe 3 or 4 months ago.
I haven't deleted my account, but
no, I still have a Facebook account, but I just was like, I don't ever really want to look at this.
Yeah.
So I just took it off my phone. I haven't missed it for even 1 single second.
Same. Yeah.
I still have all these other horrible social media apps on my phone. Yeah. If I could take TikTok off my phone, I'd probably gain 6 hours a day.
Yeah.
But Facebook, it turned out easy to get at, easy to have leave my life.
Yeah. It's crazy how far big tech has fallen, really. Certainly just at least with their the amount of political capital they have anyway. I mean, it was not so long ago that, President Obama was doing a town hall with Mark Zuckerberg, at the Facebook campus, in Silicon Valley. And now here we are.
Well, I think we're all on the same learning curve with big tech, because this is all new. And so we don't know what the possibilities are. We don't know how we don't know how the industry operates, because it's learning how to operate itself. It's sort of writing the rules as it goes. And so I think part of it is just figuring out. It seemed initially like it would be a force for good, because it was a lot of young, hip, progressive seeming people that were running things, and they were doing things to really shake up, traditionally fairly discriminatory industries or fairly expensive industries, or, things like that. But obviously unchecked power makes everyone into a monster. So it's nothing you can do about that.
Right.
And capitalism makes everyone into a monster. And those are two things that big tech has, is unchecked power and capitalism. So
that's right.
In any case,
sorry, you mentioned Louis Gohmert already.
Disgusting video of Louis Gohmert at a press conference giving a comment, and something happens in his mouth. And what it is that happens is his tooth falls out.
Yeah, you can see it. You
can see there's a video
drops.
of it.
Yeah.
It was sent to me by everyone because everyone hates me. It is the most horrifying thing that you've ever seen in your life. And it is something I don't recommend seeing, but it's just worth knowing it happened.
Yeah.
I think you just have to know that it happened.
Almost as disgusting as the actual tooth falling out is what Louis Gohmert was saying when his tooth was dislodged. It's almost as if it was instant karma for the words that were coming out of his mouth.
Yeah, of course.
But he said he was talking.
He was reporting on Hunter Biden's laptop.
Oh yeah, Right. Yeah. He said later on, he tweeted, he said, reporters are already more interested in covering the fact that my temporary crown came loose during today's press conference than they ever were in reporting on Hunter Biden's laptop or the rampant election fraud in the 2020 race. Yeah, Louis Gohmert.
Mind boggling. It's disgusting. I never want to look at a politician's mouth ever again. Or just a person's mouth. Oh, it's a tooth fall. It's just horrifying.
Yeah.
In any case, it's the worst thing you've ever seen in your life.
Watch it.
And it's all over the internet. It's all over the very social media feeds that we're trying to destroy right now.
That's right.
In any case, that's the news this week. Be thankful you live in a time where ice dancing is the best it's ever been. Also, follow all of the Christmas tree sales are going wild this year because everyone is just like, I'm stuck at home and I need a Christmas tree. We got ours yesterday.
That's very cute.
It's cute / very wonky. I recommend do what you need to do to make the holidays happy this year. And if that means buying a tree for too much money to put in your home inexplicably, then just do that. I mean, who knows why we're putting these trees in our homes, but it makes me feel happy every time I look at it. So that's all it takes.
Yeah.
And we will be back next week with hopefully 0 videos about teeth, hopefully news about a stimulus.
Oh God.
If anyone has any comments about my ice dancing spiel, I'm happy to bring proof. So happy to share that. Yep. It'll be whatever. We'll talk to you then.
Bye.
Bye.